Good morning. Thank you very much for the invite to come along and speak today and to talk a little bit about what we're seeing globally in terms of some of the challenges and I suppose how people are interacting differently with food. The most important thing I think I need to put on the table is I'm going to paint a vision of where I think New Zealand can get to in 2035. And it's significantly more ambitious than the vision Nathan gave us for the primary sector of doubling exports. To me, that just doesn't cut it. It doesn't cut it for our wider community, and it doesn't cut it for our companies, and it doesn't cut it for the people we want to come into the industry. We need a much more pragmatic vision of where New Zealand can get to. So I'm going to explain why I think we have a much greater ability to grow the industry, both for seafood industry and our wider primary sector. And also why we need to do that, because if we don't, the counter does not look particularly favourable. So, New Zealand. We've got some great attributes here, some significant benefits as a country. You know, we're an easy country to do business with. We've got low corruption, as will be discussed later today. We've got high education participation. 99% of our kids go to school every day. On a world scale, that is unprecedented. We have a great quality of life. And we're well located into Asia. Compared to many of our competitors, we're a single straight line into some of the key markets, some of the key growth markets around the world. But you've got to balance that with some significant weaknesses. In terms of innovation, we ranked around 65th in the world for availability of scientists and engineers. If you think there's only 35 countries in the OECD, we are truly developing in that particular dimension, and we can't afford to be. We don't have an international city. Auckland is a great place to live, although the house price is going up, but the reality is it's not somewhere that international companies will put their regional head office or choose to locate their global HQ to. We have to work to get attention from people. And while most of our kids manage to get to school, what they actually do when they're there is very much in question. We rank only 32nd out of 35 countries in the OECD for educational attainment. We need to do better in that space in terms of getting our children better opportunities for the future. And whether we've done it intentionally or accidentally, we've traded quality of life for income. So our income on an international scale is low. We have about 40,000 US dollars per year per capita. That compares to 62, 63 in Australia, even Singapore now about 50. So we're becoming a low wage, a low income country. And that is something, if we want to invest in our future, we can't afford to become. And part of that, to my mind, is we spend a lot of time churning our wealth rather than growing wealth. We all know our houses are getting more expensive, but our debt is going up on the other side. And that is not a sustainable position for us. So that brings me to the key question of this debate. We're a small producer, always will be. We can feed 40 million people. We need to think really smartly how we use the food we produce. Because the key for us is how do we use that food to be relevant? And my challenge to the industry is we do too much at the moment that positions us in a supply chain where we can be swapped in or out based on price. And we've seen that recently in the dairy sector. We need to be in a supply chain in a different position where what we bring, the attributes and the aspiration of our products, makes it impossible for us to be swapped. The world is changing really, really quickly. Some of these, most of these entities that I've got up here and these events have occurred or been created in the last 6 months. Coca-Cola coming into the dairy sector. You know, that's a game changer, something we should be incredibly worried about as a country. Coca-Cola is the world's leading beverage company. They don't go into a sector to be second. They go in to be the best, to be the biggest, to dominate. And they will do that in dairy. Some of these startups, Smartfish, you know, I don't know how many of you have come across it. It's an organization in Mexico, a social enterprise. It's absolutely transforming how people are adding value to fish in the southern states of the United States because it's working with artisan fishermen in Mexico bringing high quality product into restaurants, the best restaurants in some of those states like Los Angeles, like Texas, and getting a premium price. So transforming communities, transforming the experience people receive, and putting a story around the product. Another interesting one, Nemo's Garden, and a group of divers in Italy. It suddenly worked out if you float pods about 5 meters below the sea surface, they're really, really efficient at growing vegetables. And they're absolutely working out how they scale this up. They've built desalination units into these pods, and they're trying to work out how they take horticulture from the land and put it into the sea and create a whole new dynamic in their business. Another really good story up there is Jamie Oliver. Now, he's done a deal with Asda called Beautiful Vegetables. And what he's gone to Asda and he said, there's a whole load of fruit and vegetable being grown in our society, reflecting the fact we waste so much food. What can we do about it? So they've done a deal where they're buying the fruit and vegetables that are not quite the right colour, not quite the right size. They buy those off the farmers, about 50% of what they pay for the Class 1 stuff. They're selling it to consumers about 30% below what they'd pay for Class 1. At the same time, they're actually improving health outcomes. So this is a triple win scenario. You've got a situation where the farmer's better off, the supermarket's better off because they've got new sales, and the consumer, who previously could not afford fruit and vegetables, is better off because they're able to eat fresh fruit and vegetables and enhance their lifestyles. That to me is highlighting a really key issue. What do we do about food waste? I don't know how many of you are aware, but 31% of the food we produce in the developed world just gets wasted. And I think we're going to see a lot of regulation around that. I'll come back to that shortly. But other features up there, the key one for me as well, there are a lot of new people becoming interested in the primary sector, whether that's investing in assets, wanting to buy into farming businesses or agricultural, aquacultural businesses, but also looking to really disrupt what we do. And the analysis we've done suggests that somewhere around about $486 million was invested in innovative, agri-focused food innovation last year. And that's unprecedented level. It's more than double what we've seen previously. And we expect that balance to continue to grow, probably to double again this year. And they're looking at novel foods. They're looking at different ways of producing products. They're looking at how they integrate food to get it fresher, better to the consumer. So the world is changing incredibly quickly. What has got us to where we've got to today will not get us to where we want to be in 5 years, let alone where we need to be in 20 years. Disruption, that mindset of the startup, the continuous focus on change needs to become inherent to every organization. And the driver for that is we live in a multipolar world. We live in a world which has got so many different dimensions, so many different pressures, that we need to understand what our business model is going to look like down the track, rather than just reflecting the fact that the world's not going to change that much and we can pretty well live with how it is. 5 key drivers from my perspective I want to touch on very briefly. The first one is connectivity, driving, and accessibility. We're going to have 50 billion connected devices. The smartphone is only the start of what we're going to see. So our shirts will be connected, our toasters will be connected, our beds will be connected. There'll be these huge reserves of data existing around the world that will know more about us than ourselves. In fact, we'll probably find out when we've got a cold, because we'll get a text on our cell phone saying, maybe time to go and see the doctor, you might need some drugs. Reality is, people will interact with things differently as a result of that data, as a result of how that information is driving their decision making. We're seeing that already with things like Uber, Airbnb, changing the concept from owning or having permanent access to something that you only have access to when you really want it. And that's going to really start to shake up how people think about the world. From a food perspective, what does that mean? Well, we eat food. How can we only have access to it? Well, if you're a retailer, I would be worried. Because what we're starting to see already is people not wanting to go and do a week shop or 2-week shop, or in the States, a 4-week shop. They're wanting access on the day to what they choose they need, and wanting that either by ordering via a restaurant website or a website that delivers food to their door so they can cook it themselves, something like My Food Bag. People will demand access to food the day they need it. Your supply chains need to be able to respond to that. For your sector, I think that is a great opportunity, because if you can convince somebody that wants fish tonight, you can deliver fresh fish that was caught that day and actually ensure you're living on that pledge of instantaneous food on demand to the consumer. Second theme to me is we can't continue to think about some of the challenges we face in the same way as we have done. The world is moving incredibly quickly. I was lucky enough to attend Stanford boot camp last year, and I can see some of my cohort colleagues in the room. And we had Condoleezza Rice come and talk to us. And she talked about 9/11 and talked about her role as the National Security Advisor on that day, and told us that within 5 minutes of the first plane hitting the towers in New York on that day, she knew the US did not have an institution to solve the problem they were facing. That old world problems can't solve new world issues. Old world institutions can't solve new world issues. The reality for us is many of the problems we face as food producers are not being addressed by the institutions we have at present. The best example to me is around food counterfeiting. And we are under huge risk and exposure from food counterfeiting. You know, I've heard a description that there's about 10 times more Manuka honey sold globally than we actually produce in New Zealand. Zespri are under constant threat around kiwi fruit because it's pretty easy to print a box that looks like one of theirs and put kiwi fruit in it and sell it through the supply chain. We don't have an institution to solve this problem that has a real risk to the value we create from our food. We need to think about new world solutions to these problems. Third theme that really stands out to me is we need to lose the average. Nobody is average anymore. In fact, I would go as far as saying we probably haven't had an average consumer since the 1950s. The reality is that our communities can be absolutely dissected up in so many different ways, whether that's by religion, by ethnicity, by wealth, by age, by education, by gender. You know, take it whichever way you want to take it. But what it does is it creates many, many micro markets for us. And we as food producers and exporters need to get really good at targeting the micro market that works for us. If we continue to focus on the average, we will miss everybody. The reality for us, therefore, is going into China, you can't have a China strategy. If you're going into China, you need a strategy for Chengdu targeting 20 to 30-year-olds who go out and have a high level of disposable income. You need to become that focused and scale that market to the amount of product you've got available, so you actually deliver against the promises you make. Fourth theme for me is the speed of disruption. If I was a major company and got myself onto the S&P 500 index in 1930, I would be on that index for the next 75 years. So as a CEO, I've written my retirement check. I could milk that cash cow for as long as I wanted to. Reality is, if I get on that index today, I'm on it for about 15 years. Our estimation, if I get onto that index in 2030, I will be there for less than 5 years. The idea that we can develop a product that we will be able to live off the success of for a generation or more has gone. The next best thing is coming faster and faster and faster. Therefore, our mindset must be the day we have that success, the day we break through, we celebrate that night, and the next day we start worrying again. Because disruption is coming and we need to be working out what the next wave is we can ride to success. If we haven't got that startup mindset, we're not going to succeed and survive. Final thing which is coming through really clearly in all the conversations I'm having at the moment is that the conversation has really shifted around the environment, and therefore the theme of your conference, Sustainable Seafood, is entirely appropriate. The environment is no longer about doing what the rules say. It is about doing the right thing because it is the right thing to do. And if we get that mindset into our organizations, we unlock huge potential, because doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do is incredibly appealing to the customers we need to sell to. And I agree entirely with Nathan. We can produce enough food for 40 million people. Our focus is not on supplying the full diet of 40 million people. Our focus has got to be on supplying a small fraction of the diet for a much larger number of people. I used to say 10% of 400 million. I've now, having had some conversations, revised that, and I now believe that we should be focusing on supplying 5% of the diet to 800 million people. The bit of the diet that's aspirational, the bit of the diet that they eat because it says something about who they are, about what their values are, about what they want to project to the world, the bit they use for celebration. And that should be New Zealand's niche for those people with the biggest checkbooks globally. So what does all that mean? Well, to me, when you think about it, there are 5 key mega forces driving how this world looks. And I'll just run through those and give you some brief views about how we think that will impact on food and how people interact with food moving forward. The first theme is challenging the global status quo. This is a shift of economic power back towards the east. It is a return. It's the uncertainty in the West. It's our inability to unlock ourselves from the global financial crisis. You know, we have become incredibly risk averse as a culture. This has changed the psyche of our community. It's this shift towards religion. You know, this belief we have in some Western countries that the world's becoming more secular is completely wrong. The world is becoming more religious. We're going to have 3.8 billion people globally eating in accordance with religious orders by 2050. We need to recognise that. It's also the uncertainty we feel about how we live. You know, we've got cybersecurity. We had a bomb in Bangkok yesterday. There's that inherent uncertainty around our community, and we've got to come to terms with that. But what does all this mean? Well, from a religious perspective, you've got 3.8 billion people that want assurance the food they're eating meets their requirements from their religion. That is a huge opportunity if we can get that right. If we can create the product that adds some value to those people's lifestyles, adds some value to what they are eating. We need to recognise as well that as the world gets more wealthy, this inherent assumption that people will eat the food we eat because they're coming as wealthy as us is wrong. We can't just expect as wealth grows, people in China will start drinking milk. They won't, but they will eat seafood. They will continue to eat pork. They'll eat chicken. They'll eat products that match the ethnic lifestyles they've always led and just add new and exciting varieties to that. The challenge for us, therefore, is recognising that our diets will evolve as well, and we need to be prepared to accept that maybe, and I did a 40-minute interview on this yesterday for SBS television in Australia, we may well end up eating insects. We may not even know we're eating insects, but they will probably become part of our diet just because of that ethnic mix and the fact that we've got this huge demand for more animal protein and we just can't meet it with what we can produce naturally. We also can't ignore the fact that the governments are going to get more and more involved in food. For most governments around the world, sufficient affordable food is a bottom line. They cannot afford to fail on that because if they do, they lose their position as a government. And therefore we must expect continuous focus on trade barriers, restrictions, phytosanitary constraints. Our role is to work really smartly to ensure we have access to every market. You know, I applaud the government for what they've done in opening up new markets, but we need to multiply that effort many, many times over because we need that optionality to be able to sell to as many markets as possible. Second key theme I want to point to briefly is what we call future world citizens. 3 key demographics that stand out to us. 21st century consumers, those kids that have been brought up on Google, view the world as their marketplace. We can sell to them anywhere. We've also got the silver consumers, those people approaching the age of 65 and older, expected to be 1.1 billion of those by 2035. And at the moment, quite amazingly, about half the people ever reach the age of 65 are alive today. And the third key demographic for us is urban consumers. You know, 1.3 million people a week extra in cities, but not just this year, not just next year, every year until 2050. So we're talking about urban areas the size of 3 Shanghais being created globally every single year. That changes dramatically how we interact with food. For your industry, I think this globally connected consumer market is a huge opportunity. If you think about those consumers that want to pay premium prices, they want to buy food, they know where it's come from. They like going to the fish market and buying over the counter. Technology can help to unlock that for us from here in New Zealand. We can tell our stories as effectively on the internet as we can over the counter. In fact, we can probably tell them in a fuller, more complete way. We can also have a two-way communication now. Social media unlocks that ability to go backwards and forwards with communities. And if we've got our e-commerce platforms right, we can sell anywhere in the world within 48 hours. You know, you can become the local fish producer, the local seafood producer to the world. And technology provides you the opportunity to make that a reality. And I think that's a huge opportunity for the industry. But also we need to think really smartly about how we package food and take it to the market. The aging consumers, maybe slightly dry throats, probably a bit like mine today, maybe have trouble cutting things, maybe have trouble opening packages in the same way, maybe actually want smaller portions because they're consuming less energy. Think about the urban consumer. They're probably traveling 2 hours a day to and from where they work at least. They're probably living in an apartment that's half the size of this stage, probably without a kitchen. They're eating out a lot more. So how do we design solutions that meet the needs of those consumers? Because if we can put product that makes it convenient to them and gives them the experience, that's how we again make ourselves incredibly relevant to the supply chain. Third big area we see as important is infrastructure. And there's a lot of challenges in infrastructure, but three that stand out to us are education, healthcare, technology, and energy. Now, I'm only really going to touch on two of those this morning. I'm going to touch briefly on healthcare and on technology. To me, the key around healthcare is we can't afford our healthcare system. That's a simple reality. If you look at how the developing world's developing, they're not building hospitals. They're trying to think about healthcare through a different lens. And the lens they're thinking is around preventive healthcare. And that makes food really, really important. Because if we think about what we eat is a huge determinant of how well we are into the future. And that is a great opportunity for your sector again. Because we will see constraints being put on foods that have social impacts that are viewed to be adverse. You know, what we're seeing with tobacco and alcohol is only the start. But we can expect to see it in relation to certain fats and certain sugars. Governments will regulate. It may not happen overnight, but it will come. Because they cannot afford to let people continue to eat themselves into hospital. It's not something that's practical for us anymore. So products that have proven health benefits, products that bring great omega oils and help people study better, they're going to be the sort of products people will be looking for nutraceuticals, the healthcare-enabled foods. And to me, that presents a huge opportunity for your industry to prove its competence and capability in delivering healthcare outcomes. But also don't ignore synthetics. And don't think that synthetics will purely be about milk and beef. It will impact your industry as well. Now, my view is you have a choice. You can be a sheep farmer, as they were 40 years ago, and say, nobody will ever buy an oil-based carpet. Nobody will buy a synthetic carpet. You know, where we're at today, 97% of carpets sold around the world now made from oil. Very, very little made from wool. And the reality is we will see similar trends starting to take a hold in food sectors over the next 5 to 10 years. We've already seen an artificial steak. We've already seen people develop technologies now that enables them to print food. And it's not a big step from printing a beef steak to being able to print a fish-type product. It will happen, and you need to work out what your position is in it. My view is we can't afford to ignore it. We need to ensure we're investing not only in producing the best natural food in the world, but ensuring that we're in the market in relation to synthetic foods as well. Next theme that stands out to us is around the role of technology in what we're doing and how that will impact the change in food production. Nathan's already talked this morning about how you're integrating technology onto some of the boats as a monitoring facility. Our perspective is the Internet of Things will transform how we produce food. These connected devices will mean that the ability to collect data and make better decisions will drive all sorts of changes and interactions right across our food production sector. The challenge is, though, we're going to have this wave of data coming at us, and it will mean nothing unless we can analyze it effectively. So the key for your industry, for any industry, is how you bring that information into a usable format for the people that actually need to make the decisions. In your case, that may be the regulators making decisions around quotas. It may be contract fishermen that you want to be able to enable them to make better money out of their business and do better in terms of the environment. It may be from an agriculture business, how you're running your farm and utilising all the data coming off the farm. But the reality is we need platforms that integrate data. We're not big enough as a country to have multiple platforms. And this makes data a key focus for industry collaboration. And the sooner you start to work together on ensuring that data comes into a single repository and is available and usable for as many people as possible, the better the outcome will be. Final theme comes back to the environment for me, and back to this view that we need to do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. Water's a big challenge, and I know it's a huge challenge for your industry, trying to get access to some water around the coast to enable you to build and develop aquaculture facilities. But we need to recognise that the community has expectations, and balancing the community's expectations with our economic needs and finding that medium requires a lot of dialogue. And investing in that dialogue is a very worthwhile thing to do as soon as possible. For me, it's really interesting I spent a lot of time travelling. I was up in Norway, and I was meeting up there with the farming side of the industry as opposed to the seafood side. And the two don't talk as far as I can work out. They actually probably could learn a lot of each other but do nothing. But the position that they were just talking about in terms of the opportunity to unlock land, by building that community connection, they've unlocked a huge amount of value. And you go, well, there must be the opportunity for us to do the same. We've got to think very carefully about ensuring diversity. And I think what we're seeing from a lot of global companies is they're increasingly focusing on biodiversity as a key buying criteria for them. They don't want to be seen as destroying ecosystems. They don't want to be seen as damaging investment potential of their companies. So I think, where you sit with QMS is in a huge position. And one of the things that's come up time and time again in our conversations is how you take that forward. And it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the review that was announced. But for me, making sure that you've got a really standalone, sustainable system relies on having the people who are your critics around the table helping to make some of those decisions. From my perspective, the more you can say this is independent, this is not political, this is truly about what the best science says and the outcomes are driven by science, will position you to say to your customers, we are really focused on maintaining our biodiversity. And then we need to recognise food waste. 31% of the food we produce. The estimate is we need 70% more food by 2050. If you can reduce that food waste component by just 25%, do the easy stuff, but if we grow our food as we expect by 70%, we will actually have 92% more food available for people to eat. Now that could be transformational in eliminating the fact that we have 800 million people in this world that don't eat enough food. Seafood is a big part of the answer to feeding those people, and from my perspective, what we need to do and what you as an industry need to do is recognise that the global food system doesn't quite work as effectively as it could do. You have IP in your organisations. If you can unlock that IP and some of the people to help solve some of these global food problems, I think it makes you a really attractive employer for our young people that want to change the world. So thinking about how you can make a contribution without necessarily thinking you need to send food everywhere is an important opportunity. So just bringing this through, from our perspective, simple value chain, what we tend to find is about 10 to 30% of the value actually comes back to the farmer, grower, the fisherman, the producer of the product. if you actually look at what we see, most of the value gets captured at this end of the supply chain, those that own the relationship with the consumer. Inherently, that is where we're poor. We sell to distributors, we sell to food manufacturers, and we don't own the ultimate relationship with the consumer. Zespri, to me, is a great example of that. They've actually maintained those relationships with the distributors and gone out and built strong links to consumers. We need to do a lot more of that. But that is actually really hard. And the more I look at it, the more I think about this. There are 5 key drivers of a business in terms of the areas where the business needs to invest to take itself forward. One is really easy. And in fact, Volker this morning just said, capital expenditure. It's easy to get boards to sign off capital expenditure because they understand it. You know what you're going to get. There's a lot less risk around it. So if you want to build a new boat, it's relatively easy to go through the process if the financing works and the business case works and gets it ticked off. The reality is we only get closer to the consumer, we get close to the top end of that value chain by investing in 4 other areas. We need to invest in innovation. We need to invest in brand. We need to invest in great people. And we need to invest in being much, much, much closer to our customers, walking in our customers' shoes. And each of those is far more intangible and far more difficult to get ticked off by a board. And what we tend to find is the organizations that have a pivotal leader, somebody that is able to set the pace of the organization, somebody that is prepared to make the decisions and explain why we need to invest in these intangible areas, are being more successful in taking their industries forward. This work has come out of work we've done with members of the boot camp movement, and it's really, really clear to us that the organizations that have these attributes, these 7 key DNA points, stand out as being the ones that are consistently creating more value than other organizations. They have an ambition to be the best in the world, and it's great to hear that John Key challenged your industry to have the ambition to be the best in the world last year. But they have an attitude that recognizes they don't know everything. They are prepared to learn from anybody and anywhere to make their business better. They have a strategic anchor. They understand where they want to get to, what their purpose is in life. But equally, they recognize that that needs to be known by everybody in their organization, so it's widely shared. They invest behind their purpose. They invest and spend as much time thinking about the brands, the people, the market integration, the innovation as they do about the fixed assets. And they align what they're doing to get themselves where they need to go to. Highly connected to their customers, they walk in their customers' shoes. Great people, they follow Jim Collins in that they get the right people on the bus. And they are ruthlessly consistent in deployment. So they don't get sidetracked into the attractive bits on the side, they focus on where they want to go to. We're also seeing another key, and it's great to have so many people in the room today, is collaboration seems to be coming through as a very clear indicator of, while maybe not yet quite a primary DNA trait, a very strong DNA trait in most of these organizations. And the other thing is they stand out in how they use technology. They really do integrate technology across their business. It's not just an enabler, it's a strategic direction setter. I think if you can create more organizations in your industry with that sort of structure, that sort of inherent DNA, then that is how you start to unlock significantly greater value on a consistent basis. And what might that value be? Well, this is my aspiration for New Zealand. I think we should be doing 100 billion of exports by 2035. And the first thing you'll see up there is dairy's not the biggest category. Red meat is. Because everything that I read globally tells me that red meat will be the key driver of, growth in sort of a Western-style protein across Asia and South America. But for you, your sector, aquaculture, I'm challenging you to get to 4 billion. And from my perspective, that's achievable. New species. You need to have the trout discussion. I don't understand why it won't happen. But, there's an opportunity to unlock that. But it's also about getting the community on side and getting more water, because the highest use of any space we have in this country is aquaculture. That is how we drive economic wealth into New Zealand. We need to get over some of the challenges. Equally, wild harvest fishing, I've got there about $2 billion. But there's a lot of new areas as well. From my perspective, we need to focus on dairy liquids rather than dairy powders. If you look at the dairy supply chain, the easiest way to disrupt it is try and sell a powder to somebody that's got no water. They value liquid as much as they value everything else in it. And I hope I never hear Fonterra building another dairy plant anywhere ever again. Some new opportunities. The climate's changing. That's a reality. What we can do around the world will be inspired by some of the climate change opportunities that come out of us. We need to realise those and recognise that change is good. Same way, by reducing our dairy production, I think Mid-Canterbury should go back to medicinal plants. I don't know how many of you know, but Tasmania has a huge industry around opium poppies, a very, very valuable industry. We could do far, far better in that industry in this country than is done globally. So I think the aspiration is quite easy. We've grown at 4.5% value growth over the last 12 years. This requires us to grow at 5.4%. So a small uptick in that. But what it requires is people prepared to think about the world differently. Recognise that novel food will come onto the market. And if we're prepared to take hold of those opportunities and exploit them, then we have the opportunity to completely transform what New Zealand looks like. The value this creates a country where our kids can actually stay in this country and have long-term careers. It also, to me, gives us a position where we are zigging when the rest of the world is zagging. We lead the world in innovation. We lead the world in presenting the highest quality food to our consumers. So I look forward to listening to some of the conversation today. And I also look forward to seeing the seafood industry collectively become a $6 billion industry by 2035. So thank you very much.